and go? Okay. All right, well, got thumbs up. Welcome to the special meeting of the governing body, January 9th. Call this meeting to order. If you will all rise to give the Pledge of Allegiance as you're able. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, if you call the roll, please.
Mayor Padilla.
Here.
Councilmembers Hiller.
Here.
Valdivia Acala.
Here.
Ortiz.
Here.
Banks.
Here.
Kale.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Dobler.
Here.
Duncan.
Here.
And Hofer. We have
Here.
10 present. We have 10 present.
Thank you. Move on to second item, non-action items. Madam Clerk.
It's just a discussion on the budget, and Josh McInerney will be presenting.
Mr. City Manager, you want to start anything first?
No, thank you, Mayor. Appreciate you.
Okay.
I'll wait for the presentation to get pulled up, but we got asked the question of, so we had about 11 or $12 million surplus in 2023, and now in the 2026 budget, we're facing a projected deficit. So tonight, we kind of wanted to give it an overarching thesis of how did we have a surplus, how did we go to a deficit in the span of 3 years, and just what were drivers on the revenue side and expense side that kind of led to that point. Some of that was decisions we approved or just based off market conditions, and then we'll also get into potential packages we could also use to address the deficit. So with that being said, kind of the agenda tonight is kind of an educational piece on the general fund revenue side and the expense side, and we'll get into some personnel and non-personnel expense increases, then like I said, options to address the deficit, and then kind of next steps and then the discussion point. So this is the general fund history and forecast for the future. Now, what we're doing tonight is we're going over about 90% of our revenue of the general fund, which is those first 5 highlighted categories. We wanted to go over the big ones because those are our main revenue drivers, and then those are ones that we kind of have control over and they can fluctuate. So kind of getting into it. So largest revenue source in the general fund is sales tax. As we reviewed at the December meeting, inside the city limits, the sales tax is 9.35%. Now, of that 9.35%, 1% of that goes to our general fund, and then the other half-cent goes outside the general fund to our citywide half-cent sales tax fund, which fixes existing streets, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, et cetera. Now, this is the largest revenue source in the general fund currently, and as you can see from the chart on the screen, in 2020, moderate sales tax growth, and it exploded in 2021 and in 2022 to where compared to our budget, we collected in those 2 years about almost $10 million more, but the year-over-year actual increases was double digits and then 6% increases. But the thing I would take away from this slide is that it's cooled off as a year-over-year projected growth the last 2 years, to where we want to be cautious going forward and not do an over projection like there was for 24, because those 2 highlighted numbers there was projecting a $6 million increase in sales tax, and it was only about half that. So that's $3 million that we did not collect that when they approved the budget in 2023 for 2024. We didn't collect, and so that would be a under budget revenue line item. So, and then again, 2% projections going forward, and obviously like when we get sales tax receipts on a monthly basis, we reassess future projections, but we think this is a cautious projection going forward for that. Next is property taxes. Unlike sales tax, property tax is a pretty stable revenue source. We control that, and based off the mill levy formula, we know what, with pretty good certainty, what we're going to collect in each year. So as an educational piece, remember, we're only one of 8 property taxing entities in the city limits, and we're about 25% of a property taxers, or property tax owners' property tax bill. And then also, of our mill levy that is 36.956 currently, that doesn't all go in towards the general fund. Part of that goes to pay our bond and interest payments in the debt service fund, and a tiny sliver of it goes into our special liability fund, which pays any legal obligations we may have. So another key denotion on this slide is from 23 to 24, we had basically unheard of property valuation increases for those 2 years, so almost at 9%. Compared, if you look at the years prior, they were in the 1% to 3% range. So we were naturally, based off the mill levy formula, the higher the valuation, and we keep our mill levy the same, the more the city is going to have collected in property taxes. Now, in 2025, that dipped off a bit, about a 4.54% growth, and we're projecting a 4% growth rate for 26. But bottom line is those days of almost 9% growth rates in property taxes are probably behind us for the time being, so we want to be cautious going forward, and that's regardless if we adjust the mill levy at all. So if we keep the mill levy flat and property taxes don't increase, we're going to collect as much as they have in the past, we're going to collect less in property taxes. So, and then we also got some questions on, hey, internally and externally, if we never adjusted the mill levy that we've in the past, what would that have meant for our budget? Now, overall in 3 years, compounding, it would have been about $9.6 million. Now, that $9.6 million would not have necessarily gone into the general fund, because on the previous slide, we've actually kept our general fund mill within 1 or 2 mills of each other for the last couple of years, to where it would just been $9.6 million over the 3 funds, which was bond and interest payments, special liability, and general fund. So that was the net effect of the decision. Now, it is also true that valuations were abnormal during that time period, so the thought process was to lower it to be what a normal valuation was. Finally, the next one is franchise fees. So those are charges we get from Kansas Gas, Evergy, Cox, AT&T for operating our right-of-way. And on this slide, in 2022, we had about a $16 million collection for that year. Now, the reason being is there was a cold event, kind of like what we're going through now, early in 22, that where those Kansas Gas, Evergy made a lot of money during that fiscal year, to where we were a benefactor of that. So that was kind of an outlier year. And then over the subsequent years, that has obviously cooled off to where that 24 number, that's basically, since we've closed the month, all of us closed the month of December, is that number's pretty hard and fast, to where for whatever reason in the budget in prior years, they budgeted at $17.6 million, and that was way overestimated, to where we only actually collected $15 million for this year. So that was a line item that came in $2.5 million under budget. And going forward in the future, we're projecting just to be around that $15 million mark. Now, that's subject to change based off collections into 25 and onward, and we'll assess that as we enter the 26 budget. But part of the reason we were collecting more in 21 and 22, and possibly 2023, was because of that cold event. So that was more money that we had coming in the past that we don't have coming in today, which is what naturally made a bubble effect there. Finally, we talked a little bit about this in the budget discussion this summer. So pilots, which are also known as payments in lieu of taxes, are basically, we have enterprise funds in the city known as parking, water, stormwater, and wastewater. And they don't necessarily pay property taxes, but they operate as a quasi-business function. So in lieu of paying those taxes, part of their budget has an expense that is then transferred in as a revenue towards the general fund. So, for example, water fund has an expense known as a pilot. That money goes into the general fund as a revenue. Now, we lowered that amount in 2024 because we issued bonds on the Polk Quincy utility project, and in order to not raise rates as much to make room for that debt that was incurred, we lowered pilots to basically balance that fund for the budget. And so What that equates to in a mill levy would be about 1.5 or 6 in terms of a mill levy decrease. So takeaway from that slide is we lowered revenue going into the general fund because we had to help out utilities with a bond issuance. And then also talked about during the budget process, this last going around for the revenue slide is fees for service, also known colloquially as our admin fees. So city has over 50 different funds. So a couple of those are on our screen, which are the water fund, health insurance fund, wastewater fund. And what those admin fees are is we charge those funds a fee for service as an expense, and they come into the general fund as revenue. The reason we do that is those funds use our police department, our legal department, our finance department, because they're not necessarily paying any other fee besides that. So since they're using those services, we can justify charging expense there to gain in revenue on our general fund since they are benefiting from our general fund departments. There's also a couple of contracts in there, such as our 501 SRO contract that we get as revenue. But overall, we haven't really adjusted those admin fees, and that's something we're going to look at the 2026 budget process. But one thing to keep in mind, in order to increase that admin fee, there has to be revenue in the fund to support an increase in the admin fee. So it's predicated off fund balance. So a good example of where I would not recommend increasing the admin fee is our motor fuel fund, which is funded through the gas tax. As we reviewed in the summer, that's been a flat, and I know it's not on your screen, but that's been a flat revenue source that funds our pothole snow removal division, to where that fund over the upcoming years is getting very tight fund balance wise. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily increasing the admin fee there because that's already over capacity with expenses. But that's something as we progress through the 2026 budget, we'll talk about more. So before we get into expenses, on the revenue side is through sales tax, high property tax collections, a reduction of pilots, or a higher pilot collection and higher franchise fee collection. We naturally in 21, 22, and 23, we're kind of riding a wave of high revenues, right? And now that's basically stabilized to where we're back into the days of where year-over-year revenue growth is going to be probably between 2% and 4%, compared to sales tax, our largest revenue growth, growing at 12% for a year. So getting into the expense side, obviously in a service organization, personnel is your largest expenses. And so what personnel encompasses is anything that's compensation related, anything payroll tax related, overtime pay, holiday pay, et cetera. And given our current union contracts, those would be the projected numbers for 2026 given our budget. Now, we get a lot of questions on vacancy credits. Basically what a vacancy credit is, we have a lot of unbudgeted positions in the city to where we can budget for a position, but if we don't fill them, we'll have realized savings. So we basically credit ourselves to where we can spend in other categories. So in this projection, we have about $1 million vacancy credit already in place. Now, that's up to debate on if that's too high or too low, and that's something we can examine during the budget process, but just so you know, we are employing a vacancy credit, and we have been for the last 5 years with each one of our budgets. So getting into what we did on the personnel side. So on your list of your screen, those are mainly general fund employees. AFT has some non-general fund employees, but police, fire, and are all general fund employees. And that's in terms of just base matrix percentage, that's the increases we've given them over 24, 25, and 26. And union reopening contracts and union contracts that were approved this summer. Now, the keynote on this slide is the weighted average increase for employees in 25 was about 8.45%. And so that's greatly eclipses what we have coming in on revenue. So naturally, that's where the inflection point is kind of had at. And then this also does, actually getting into quantifying it. So this is just in terms of this doesn't count for overtime pay, holiday pay, et cetera. This is just base compensation. These are quantifying the dollar amounts that was in each one of those union contracts. So from 24 to 25, in just base wages, we added to the wage pool about $8.5 million through said increases. Now, one thing that city manager and the HR staff is examining right now is the issue of compression. What compression is when you give such a large union increase, I'll just use police as an example, of 17.5%, naturally it could be a situation where you have people in the union making about the same or less, usually not less, than what people in management are making. Now, it's also ultimately a policy decision is, does the incentive structure need to be there to incentivize people in the union moving up into management, et cetera? That's something that's being examined, and also there's been some equity issues with new employees at a higher market rate than existing employees, so that's going to be talked about in the next couple of weeks on what's the right strategy to address some of those issues are in terms of an appropriate adjustment. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, or was that a good capture? Okay. And then next, we've gotten requests from this, and we thought it'd be good to show on a slide. So across the city, in 2022, we had 1,146 employees, and in 2025, we've added capacity back to 1,182. Now, we can say just because we added positions, that doesn't necessarily mean we're filling them. So to kind of give you a stat, and I don't have it on the screen, but the average employees we were paying per pay period in 22 was about 1,020 in 2022. So compared to in 2024, where it was about 1,060. So it is a true statement to say that not only have we increased the wage pool through increases, but we've also increased the quantity of number of people we're paying within the last 4 years. Now, I think everyone on the dais knows this, but mainly our employees are funded out of the general fund. That's police, fire, public works, planning, finance, HR, et cetera. But about 70% of our employees are in the general fund. And then what were some stuff on the non-personnel side that increased over the last couple of years? So I think council's been briefly briefed on this, but we're implementing a new ERP system. And with that ERP system, you have to have one system online while you're getting the other one and paying for the other one. So we're paying standard operating fees starting in 2024, and those have been expensive to where, compared to where we had surpluses in prior years, we weren't paying those, but those are new fees that have been occurring. And then also, we have the hotel now, and now I put an asterisk by that because obviously, for the purposes of this projection, I have to account for worst case scenario, right? So we still own the hotel today, so I'm accounting for us having that. Obviously, if there's a policy decision, all of these numbers would come down by the amount on your screen for that specific line item. Next, we do have social service grant programs that we've increased over the last couple of years. Those are obviously all approved by council, but that has been an increase. You've heard me talk about this ad nauseum, but we're being charged by the county through inmate cost, and that has increased over the last 2 years, year over year, 25% for each year, which has been a huge cost. And that has increased in both the contractual per hour amount and number of hours worked. And then we have to pay the electricity bills on the Evergy streetlights. Now, one could argue it is cheaper that Evergy maintains the streetlights, but that's just a cost of business factor through just general inflationary increases that are going up. So we wanted to highlight the big items outside of the department control, because when looking at the department budgets, there's really not, besides personnel costs, there's nothing really that went up astronomically that would have been a material change when looking at it in terms of a surplus to a deficit. So before I get into options to project a deficit, it's kind of like my overarching thesis when looking at this and being objective as possible is during COVID, the city council at the time had to make tough decisions because everyone thought sales tax was going to fall off like a cliff, property taxes falling off like a cliff, et cetera, to where we had to eliminate expenditures in the budget for the 2021 budget. Now, the inverse effect actually happened where we collected more in sales tax. So in a one-year span, we lowered expenses and thinking revenues were going to shorten, but they didn't. So revenues came in higher than expected. So that's where the bubble came from. And we cut expenses thinking revenues were going to fall, but they didn't fall. And we've been the beneficiary of writing those decisions over the last 3 years to where that, as we've increased capacity back up again, back to what 2020 levels were, that's where we've hit the inflection point. So we've reviewed this kind of at the December meeting. A couple of options, range of options to address the projected deficit would be we could have departments make cuts. We basically have departments eat it all, 13% cuts about in the general fund. Option two, as you've heard at the last meeting, to pursue some sort of sales tax measure such as a public safety sales tax to get more money into the general fund, and or obviously option three, a combination of the two through revenue enhancements and expense reductions to plug that gap. Now, the options probably isn't the best. I didn't do a good job naming the slide. This should have been tools to address. But what are some things we can do, right, on the revenue side and the expense side? So revenue side, we could lower on that. If you go back to that property tax slide, part of that mill levy going into debt service, we could shift into the operating budget. So what we could do is we could delay or push or reduce bonded projects in our capital improvement program to make room for more of that mill instead of paying debt service going into the operating budget. So we could do that. We can increase pilots for 2026 by $500,000 compared to what they are today. Now, the key thing to know with pilots is those are secured mainly through our utility rates that are set for 24 through 26. So I'd like to do a little more digging on what the future looks like, since we'd have to project for 27 and beyond on rates that technically aren't approved yet. We've talked about the fee schedule adjustment coming back to the Policy and Finance Committee meeting and presenting some of those options throughout the course of 25. And then another side is the issuing a sales tax. Now, Amanda can correct me if I'm wrong, but you can enter in a sales tax range from 1/10 of a cent to a 1/2 cent, and those would be the range of revenue collections if the governing body to approve those. Now, just a reminder, that has to be ultimately approved by the governing body and then eventually the public, so it's a two-pronged approval process. And so going to the expenditure side, what are some big things we can do to decrease expenses besides touching departments? We can make a policy decision on the hotel. Like I said earlier, we can review grant distributions. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of grant distributions. That's more so of when we go through the budget process this cycle, is it more valuable in the council's position to have that money going outside the city, or is it better served inside the city? So just going through a more fine-tooth comb process. Finally, or the next couple, we can spend down to a 15% reserve level. Now, $2 million's on your screen. I want to be very clear, that's a very low amount. When projecting reserves for 26, when we're still closing 24, is kind of still of a projection. So I just wanted to put a very low floor amount, but that's an option we can talk about as we get into the budget process for the year. We can delay some vehicle purchases out of the general fund for about $500,000. And then some other things we can do is we can institute a hiring freeze. That way, that saves money on potentially future salaries that we would be paying. Now, the negative effect is, yeah, you wouldn't be filling those positions, but mathematically we're saving money to therefore save as much as we can in 25 to help ease the blow in 26 and beyond. Now, this is an example of a sample package that the city manager put together. So kind of briefly touched to most of these, but reduce CIP projects. These could be programs such as, I think what's being played with right now is reducing the infill sidewalk program, kind of changing the way Dreams is funded. So instead of being bonded, it would be half-cent sales tax funded, and a couple of others to where we could reduce our debt service fund by 2 mils, which would mean $2.8 million more would be going into the general fund than instead of bonded and interest fund. We could also, if we made a policy decision with the hotel and it was no longer subsidized by the general fund, that would help us save some money. We can spin down reserves further. Like I said before, we can analyze grant programs and determine, is that money better kept within the city or can we go without it, et cetera, just more of a review process. We can have departments make reductions, which will obviously be the brunt of this scenario. And then obviously revenue adjustments in terms of pilots and the fee service schedule. So these two slides are more just so options that we have at our disposal because we want to get ahead on this and get governing body feedback on what's a good area to pursue versus what's not a good area to pursue. And getting into the sales tax initiative. So we discussed this at the December, I think, 9th meeting, so exactly a month ago. City manager wants to pursue 6 sales tax initiatives. We've already touched on item 1, but I think on items 2 through 6, each of those would be a separate vote. So there'd be 6 votes total, or 6 questions total, and citizens could choose what programs they'd want to fund versus what they wouldn't, versus if they would like to fund a program or not. So, and again, those are ultimately approved by the governing body and the public. And then finally, just what a timeline it would look like if that option is pursued. If we wanted to vote on in April, that would need, for April 21st election, that would need to be voted on in early February, and then at one of the first 2 February's meetings. So what we are currently doing, what staff is currently doing, is doing polling to gauge what citizens support would look like for a half-cent sales tax, because we don't want to, it probably wouldn't be good practice to put something on the ballot if we were to go that route and citizens wouldn't support it. So we want to get something that would be supported by the public at large as well as the council if that route is pursued. And I guess kind of next steps is we want to seek kind of additional governing body feedback on the proposed options, and as we enter in through 2025 now, kind of providing governing body on deadlines and options we want to do to kind of basically plug that deficit for 2026. And I think a good place to start is that CIP, because when we approve a CIP, a lot of that stuff is bonded. So that it's not directly related to the budget, but it is. So that's a good place to start on what an appropriate CIP looks like. That way we can have our mill levy, if we were to keep it flat, adjusted accordingly as we enter into the 2026 budget process. But that's just, obviously, I mean, we're open for discussion and questions too, but that's just kind of the brief overview of how we got in here and how revenues were increasing in a hurry and now they stabilized, and how we had expense reductions, and now as we've increased capacity, that's kind of what has got us to this, where we're at today. So with that, I mean, I guess discussions will open up for questions.
Okay. I'm going to start. Councilwoman Hofer.
I've got a question how the hiring freeze would work. We naturally, and I'll take the fire department and police department as an example, we naturally have retirements every year. So would that freeze allow us to replace those retiring, or would we not be hiring at all?
Under our form of government, that's ultimately a city manager decision, so I'll defer to him on that.
Yeah, Councilmember Hofer, as Josh mentioned, that would be my discretion, and it would be case by case. You are correct. We do have continuing retirements in PD and fire. I know that we're looking at anywhere from 12 to 14 new recruits starting, I guess, in this next academy for PD. But again, that's something that we will monitor as moving forward. But we do ultimately have the discretion to select which positions we're going to fill and which ones we're not.
So how does the freeze work?
The freeze would work at, I mean, right now, I think we're carrying somewhere around 100, it's about 100 vacancies, I think, in the general fund, or,
Yeah.
83 vacancies in the general fund. I know that somewhere around half of those are PD positions, PD and fire. 51 is police, and how many? And 3 are fire. So, so the other positions are non-public safety positions. And so essentially what we would do is we would, again, I think we're sitting in an academy of anywhere from 12 to 14, so those would go forward. But moving forward, we would determine whether or not we needed to continue. We could freeze the non-public safety positions, and then on a case-by-case basis, make the determination whether or not we fill those. And then again, monitor our retirements in police and fire and determine if we're going to move forward with filling those.
Like, I guess I'm trying to understand, and it wouldn't matter what department. Somebody retires, are we going to backfill them under a freeze, or are we going to, I'm trying to think of an example, and I can't think of one. Are we going to leave that position open? I'm trying to understand if the freeze just keeps it as a level number for the whole city, or if we go down because somebody's retired and we're not refilling.
So, and I'm just throwing out random numbers, right? Like, so let's just say that we determine that if we freeze the non-public safety positions today, and that saves us $1 million. If we wanted to target saving $1 million through a freeze, we would manage that. If somebody retired, I mean, theoretically, we could hire that position back and still maintain the current positions that are frozen. So it really is just, it's a matter of how much we really want to try to save.
Okay, so somebody like the sustainability person we were hoping to hire would go unfilled, most likely.
Again, it would probably depend on what we wanted to do. If we really wanted to push that program, then, I mean, that's something that we would fill. If not, then we wouldn't.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Kell, did you have a question?
So over the last, since our last meeting until now, there's a lot I've thought about. And the one thing we just really need to look at, you know, I was a proponent of, hey, we got to do something with the mill levy, because or else we're going to be shooting ourselves in the foot 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road if we don't look at our budget now, look at the mill levy and all that. But one thing I really thought about was the sales tax aspect of things. How many people outside of our city limits come in and spend money? You know, if we can look at our citizens and say, okay, hey, this isn't just going to be you taking care of this. This is going to be taking everyone coming in, taking care of this, helping out. So I think that's one thing we need to really push on that aspect if we do go with the sales tax aspect of things. Another thing I was thinking about, we need to really quit comparing ourselves to Wichita on some of these graphs and other things going on. Their economics down there are completely different than our economics up here. And, you know, I see, okay, you know, for example, I know we're partnering up with Parks and Recs with the county. Koch brothers give $10 million to the Parks and Recs down there to do all this stuff. We don't have the $10 million donor sitting right around here handing us money. They have this going on, they have this, you know, all these economic developments going on. We just honestly cannot be compared to Wichita anymore, I think, and to show what's going on with us. And I was really thinking about that over that time, that we almost need to boot them off the radar when it comes to our comparison cities, and look at Wichita, Lawrence, Kansas City, Lawrence, Manhattan. Those are our comparable cities because they just have so much going on down there that's completely different than us. It's not even comparable really to me. But I think we just need to really have a hard discussion with ourselves, hard discussion with the citizens. You know, we need to be pushing, you know, get our ideas together and start pushing it out there to make sure they understand that we're not just trying to, oh, we want to raise your taxes, or we want to do this, you know, that it's gonna, mentally they think it's gonna be hurting them. We need to show them the positives, what we've already done, and what the positives of what our plan is. And you know, Josh, you said what, February, if we wanted something on the ballot?
Under what has been proposed, I can go back to it on the slide. And the reason the April election timeline was chosen, I failed to mention this, so apologies on me, is if it was approved, in theory, if it was approved in April, it would allow us to capture for the full year of 26. And also, if it was approved before the 2026 budget process, we know what revenue's coming in. That was the rationale behind it.
Okay. So on that aspect there, if we are going to try to maybe go that route, we really need to buckle down, maybe have a few more special meetings and really look at this overall, so we come up with a solid plan that we're mostly behind. I know no plan is going to make all of us happy, but it's one of those things I think we need to really start buckling down if we're going to go with something like that, so we can do what's best for the city. And because if we start cutting too much, we're going to start hurting our own employees, our own productivity, our own progress we've made over the last couple of years on different projects and things like that. So, you know, it's one of those things we need to really start looking at what we want to do, and like I said, maybe a few more special meetings to get that plan going and get it where we can get it on the ballot, but also get the public educated about it. Thank you.
City manager and then councilwoman, or you want the councilwoman to go first?
I think the city manager just wanted me to add a point of clarification for Josh on the sales tax. It's not simply because of revenue. There's actually, because it's an election year, there's very specific state laws about when you can have an election within a time frame of another election. So in Kansas, basically from June 22nd through the end of the year, you're not allowed to have a special election. So if you wanted to have a special election, it has to be done before June 22nd. It requires 75 days lead up at a minimum for the county commission election office to pull off a special election. The Secretary of State's office really recommends 90 days, so 75 is really cutting it close. So really, the deadline that you can have when you're trying to not have it around the same time as your filing deadline in June and before your June 22nd election, the end of April is really the window of time you have to have a sales tax. So if you want to have one, you kind of got to have one by the end of April or not have one. And you also have to avoid when the school's having a bond issue, because you can't have an election within so many days of another election.
So,
Okay, Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So how much does a special election cost us? Because there is a cost to it, I believe.
I think the city clerk passed out a letter from the elections commissioner. We had a meeting with him to get those kind of questions answered for you. If you wanted to do a mail ballot election, I believe it's roughly about $320,000 to do a mail ballot election.
Okay, and I do have that, I just wanted, but the public doesn't have that, so I wanted to make sure that everybody understands that. Okay, you know, I know that this has been done before. It's not WIBW has done it, they've did a survey. It's not, it's just a survey, you know, it's not a certified one or anything, it's just whoever wants, we can do something like that. I do agree. We only have one shot if we're going to put it on the ballot, you know, and if we don't, we can't come back with that at all. But it would be nice to maybe do that unofficial survey with WIBW to see how the people feel, you know, because I know a lot of my constituents, they don't want it. They don't want to support it. They do understand it, but they still don't want it. Josh, my question is, are there any employees not paid out of the general fund? You said there was, if I heard you correctly.
Yeah, so they're about,
And who are they?
so let me go back to that slide. So
Because did you say 75%?
I rounded 70% of our employees are in the general fund. Now, the main ones not in the general fund are utilities employees, which are Sylvia Davis's group, water, wastewater, and stormwater. their salaries are secured by user fees through utility bills. So that's where the great majority of the other ones are funded. We have grant-funded employees through, and then some people in the parking fund, so our PCOs they're secured by leases in the garages. So those are a couple of the other employees paid out of those funds.
Okay, and then when you have here zoo on page 8, zoo insurance payment, we're still paying insurance with the zoo?
No, so we actually get a revenue from them in the form of an insurance payment, because I think contractually, since they're technically on our insurance still, or can you fill in the gaps on that?
Don't hold me to it. I'm
Yeah.
trying to off the top of my brain. But we have an agreement where I believe we pay the insurance provisions and then they reimburse us and it comes off and it ends up being now a calculation where they're paying us the money because the sales tax portion offsets it, if that makes sense. So no, we're not paying for it. They're paying us is what I believe it is.
Yeah, they are paying. That was on the revenue side, so they are paying. This last year, they paid us about $105,000 for that.
And is that for the employees then, or because we're just like self-insured?
It's the property insurance because we still own the property. And so we have certain requirements that they have certain properties insured.
That's all I have for now, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple clarifying questions. When it comes to a special election, which not obviously, I don't believe it's the best option, but just so we have an understanding, timing-wise with that special election, like you said, if they're asking for 9 days, we would have to figure that out by the 21st, basically, of this month at a governing body meeting,
Yes.
if we were to do that. So you're talking less than 2 weeks.
If you did the last date in April, I believe it's February 3rd is on the date on the slide, calculating back. Josh, do you have that slide?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Apparently I need glasses. I'm getting old. But the 4th. But yes, you're on a very tight clock.
For all intents and purposes.
Yes.
I mean, we wouldn't want to wait till that fourth meeting. Okay. Thanks. Okay. And there's no way around it. I'm sure that everybody understands that. If we were to do department reductions to try to get a chunk of that, that equals decrease in services. Okay, there's no way around that, any which way. So as long as the public understands, if we don't want extra tax and we want to do reductions to try to meet that number, that means the services that the city already does, that a lot of people already complain about, are going to be less effective than what they are right now. Make sure that's on the record. Okay? Sales tax, very regressive tax. There's no way, I mean, that's one thing that's not so expensive for one person is extremely expensive for another. Okay, so that sales tax is going across the board. I appreciate your question about asking how much money comes in. I'm sure there's somebody who could give us that figure. But just as a general thought, is there ever a possibility that for certain households, if we implement a sales tax, just like we do for rebates for utilities and other things, is there a way to do, if your household's under a certain amount, having a rebate for sales tax?
Councilman, on slide 17, that's actually item number 5, expansion property tax utility rebate program, safe homes programs.
Oh, I missed that, 17?
Yes, sir, it's item 5, where we have an opportunity to expand those types of programs that you mentioned. And if it were the governing body as well, I mean, we could certainly look at sales tax as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilman Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. I got a host of things here. They are in absolutely no particular order. I've just been making notes and going through stuff. On this sheet, page 12, where you give us the FTE count, does the 1182 number include the 83 vacancies?
Yes, so this does reflect vacancies.
Okay, so they're included in that number because
Yes.
if we filled them tomorrow, we'd be paying for them.
Correct, and I want to make one point of clarification. So city manager said we about have 80 vacant positions in the general fund. Citywide, it's about 126.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
good question.
On page 18, you talk about engaging a consultant to perform polling to gauge citizen support, but I'm assuming that's engaging them after we would take a vote to put it on a ballot. So you're doing that as we speak?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, we hope to have the data back here within the next couple weeks.
Okay. When we go to page 16, there's the department reductions. I'm assuming at this point, outside of the presentations we've seen, those aren't actually outlined specifically. Those are just, that's that 13% number.
We've gone into a high level, but that would need some more refining behind the scenes, and we're happy to meet with council members on what that looks like.
Okay, I mean, for whatever it's worth, I do think there's some fallacy in just across the board percentages, because I think there are some departments that can incur more and others that can incur less. And I think when we set a one number and say, you all have to stick to that number, as opposed to doing actual assessments of each department and saying, okay, this department needs 8% and this department could do, say, 17, I think we box ourselves in a little bit. So I wish we have a little more measured approach to how we assess each department as we work through it and see what those percentages would look like. That just a thought on that. All right, so pilot fees, we cannot, under state law, make anybody who currently does not pay property tax pay. However, people could, under the law, pay voluntarily. But based on the data I've seen, I don't think we have a single entity in this city voluntarily paying pilot fees to us. Is that a basic general assessment?
So there is actually, when you asked me that question, I actually found almost a 30-year-old contract, and I can send it to you. We're in agreement with the state. I forgot the rehabilitation services. They pay us about $25,000 a year. I don't know if it's technically a pilot, but the state does pay us for some agreement way back in the day. So
Okay. I think at some point, we need to develop a system. I can't force anyone to pay it, but as of right now, I don't think anyone has an idea what that would look like. And I think we could have designed some system that says, look, here's the issue. We're going to show up with police and fire. We recognize, I mean, we have a lot of folks who don't pay property taxes, and that's fine. They do they employ a lot of people. They offer a lot of great services. I'm glad they're in our city. But the downside of that is, in some of those agencies, they've got a fair number of people who do not live in this community either, right? 40% of our working population travels to Topeka every day to work. So we're not capturing anything on that end. I think at some point we need to develop a recommended pilot fee charge that we can send out to the community to say, hey, if you're really small and you want to help the cause based on your square footage of your property, if it's within this, it's probably $100 a year. I'm not trying to knock every church in town, all right? But at the same time, if we have some fairly large people who own a lot of different buildings, and we can assess, we would recommend, it would be really great if you could help the cause at this level, at least it gives them some guidelines. And if we're not going to proactively develop that, I guarantee you they're never going to proactively think about it or come to us to talk about it. And so I think there's some revenue source opportunities there if we could look at developing some program so that then folks like me can sit in rooms with some of these folks and put a little pressure on them to say, really? I've had 20 fire calls out to your buildings and we're glad we're showing up, but you don't pay anything into the system. Help me out, right? So I think that would be helpful if we could look at that with our pilot fee program. I just want to make a clarifying comment, and I know it's not the same because I understand this $9 million on property tax. But I want to point out that despite the fact that we've lowered the mill levy by 3 mills over the last couple years, while that means we have not captured that $9 million, I of course would argue that's $9 million our citizens have gotten to keep. But regardless, the number we're collecting is still higher every year. So while we are not collecting as much as we could have, our property tax collection number has gone up every year, even with a flat and lower mill levy because of the valuation process. So we are collecting, quote unquote, more number-wise in property taxes based on what's coming in. I would like to see an accounting of all of our reserve funds that exist within the city. I don't need tonight, I don't need numbers tonight, but I know some of our departments have reserve funds, and I think it would be beneficial to us to see what all of those look like right now and what percentages they're at and the reasons for those percentages, because I know it's to back up bonds and debts, but it'd be nice to have a better accounting of that. If a sales tax went on a ballot in April and was passed, when would it start to be collected? Do we know that?
First quarter after 90 days after the election. So
So October.
October 1st, Councilman. We probably wouldn't get our first check until December.
Okay. Can someone explain to me what happens, what's legally allowable, and maybe it's all, if there are overages in utilities, for example? So let's just, I'm gonna simplify this just to keep it simple, so make sure I'm making sense. Let's say they have a surplus of $5 million one year, all right? Does that money have to stay with the utilities department, or can it float over into the general fund?
Under Kansas law, it could float over to the general fund under the public purpose that they are a city-ran utility fund, and revenue can be redistributed to the community in other ways to lower your water rates or lower your property taxes or fund your street repairs. So yes, we just have to be able to articulate the public purpose that is justifying the increase.
And I ask that for a couple reasons, because I'm interested in what those budgets look like, because we don't always dig as deep into those budgets here as we do our general fund. But second of all, when we got those presentations during the last budget, and I asked this at the time, they presented us a 13% cut. And I said at the time, I'm a little confused by this presentation because most of their, as Josh said today, is backed up by the fees we charge in that department, including the projects and the salaries. But it was said, well, we want to show, so if the idea is that they are also going to make cuts, even though right now they don't necessarily need said cuts, if we're going to have them making cuts, my question is, if that saves us $1 million in utilities, there's no reason not then to float those savings over to add to this piece, if that's one of the paths we go down. So that's why I raised that question, since that was one of the presentations brought up to us. Last two things I'll point out is, I think an important conversation around the talk about a public safety piece of this sales tax is, and I guess this message needs to go out both to the citizens but also to our police and fire unions, is it's not extra money. The idea of that, from what I understand, is to replace the current funds in the budget to free up those funds for other parts of the budget. It's not to bring in that money and then say, great, that money's that's extra money on top of what we have, because one, that doesn't solve our budget problem, and two, the first thing we're going to get is a wage reopener request that says, hey, you got all this money for public safety, all right? And I think that's an important message, because I don't want the expectation of the people or of our employees to be, hey, you're flush with cash now for public safety, because that's not what that intention is. It's to lock down those budgets so they can keep pace as we move over time. At least I'm hoping that's the intention, not to add more and then still have these other problems in the other part of the budget. The last thing, which we can't currently do under state law, and if we have some more time, maybe my city attorney over there doesn't like this idea, and to be honest, half of the elected officials I talk to across the state of Kansas don't like this idea either, but all sales tax is voter approved. We do not have any authority as a governing body to repeal any sales tax, just as much as we don't have any authority to add sales tax. At some point, my concerns have been with this sales tax suggestion is we're not offering anything up in return. We're not offering cuts that show we're meeting people halfway by going ahead and still continue to cut $5, $6, $7 million. We haven't offered anything else to show that it's just kind of been presented as we need the money, you know, and we're looking at efficiencies and those kinds of things, and I'm all for it. I would like us under state law, which we don't, to consider, I believe as of right now, and Josh can give me numbers later, I think our food sales tax collection is about $5 to $6 million a year, give or take, and that may have gone up the last few years. If I can go talk to the legislature, I'd like to have some authority on the local level to put those kind of things in front of our voters to remove some of those taxes. And if at some point, whether it's now or a year from now, we put together an overall sales tax increase, I'd like it to include an ability to remove the local food sales tax as an offset, because sales tax is regressive. It hits the low income more than anybody, and food is an absolute necessity. Now, I can't do that under state law right now, and like I said, there's elected officials who go both ways on that, because then that puts the onus on them of having to take the pressure from the people. Why don't you do that? Put this on the ballot, right? And I get that. So I can't fix that problem today, but it is something that I've thought about as I look at things we can offer citizens and how we make those changes. So there's all my random thoughts that have gone through my head, and just wanted to offer those up. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Kell?
I think the city manager wanted to respond.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. If you allow me to, I just want to reiterate that it has been stated on multiple occasions that as we go through the budget process, and even if we are successful in achieving any of the sales tax initiatives, that I will ensure that we are running as lean as possible and that we find those efficiencies. I'll tell you right now, and I mean, we're working on it right now, even just we're scrubbing line items in departments right now. I mean, we're looking at historical spending and the budgets in those line items, and I mean, we're scrubbing down to line items by divisions within our departments. And I will tell you, I've had the conversations, obviously, I mean, I haven't shared with a number of the council members here, but as we are preparing, one way or another, we're looking at those efficiencies. We're looking at how we can thin out some of our numbers in upper management even. So I will say it for the record that regardless if we're successful or not of these sales tax initiatives, we're going to be running as lean as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor, I did acknowledge Councilman Kell first and then you.
Okay, just, can I get a little bit more clarification on that, like, trial balloon survey idea? Because I believe it was Councilwoman Ortiz said like WIBW. Can I get a little, what that would look like to get this information?
So thank you, Councilman. The WIBW, I'd have to research a little bit more into. I don't know if anybody's well versed on that here. But what we've done in the last week is we've gone and solicited proposals from companies that are consultants that do political polling. And so I think we landed on a company for 16, I think it was 16, Braxton can help me out. But I'll let Braxton speak to this.
Can I assist, because I've taken the lead on that? We've engaged a consultant for approximately... Is this mic on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry I came on late, we were finishing dinner.
Another
How's
meeting.
everybody?
Good, I just got back. We're pretty much trapped. Trapped in our house. What you doing? Because we don't want to.
Throw it against the wall.
We've engaged a professional consultant that specializes in polling, and the contract is approximately $17,000. They have provided us a script. We have approved the script. They are going to commence the polling either this week or next week. They're going to poll.
I'm sorry, Braxton. I still can barely hear you.
Can you turn this mic up?
We've engaged.
Karen, can you lock the door, please?
Oh, she probably needs a key.
We've engaged a consultant.
sorry.
It's okay. We've engaged a consultant for a contract worth $17,000. They will begin the polling, if not this week, next week, and we're looking at a 2-week turnaround.
That's our target is 2 weeks. They're going to poll 500 people. They feel that the margin of error is fairly low, lower than approximately 4%. With that large of a sample size, there are approximately 25 questions that they're going to ask to be able to laser focus in on these various options that Josh had shown on the slide. And then they will scrub that data and provide us with a report. And then obviously the city manager will share that as appropriate so that you all have good information to make good decisions relative to whether or not the public is going to support any one of those initiatives or more than one of those initiatives, right? Because none of us want to be in this position of having a vacuum of information and try to determine whether or not you want to pass the sales tax without having an idea of whether it's going to be successful with the voters. Glad to stand for any questions.
So follow up on that. Who would they be questioning? And that's what, like, when it came up, I believe the councilwoman said the WWW. I just know when you throw something out there for like WWW, KS&T, whatever, you get everyone and their mother that may not have anything to do with the city, being a city resident, commenting on things. So I'm looking for a little bit more clarification to make sure we're hitting the people we need to hit and not just someone else that wants to give their opinion.
Yes, sir. So one of the very first things that they did was they contacted the elections office to get the census tract information so that they can make sure that they've got a representative sample across the entire city to be able to ask that. Their question needs to.
All right, well, thank you. I just wanted to, like I said, clarify, because it's one of those things that you get a lot of bad information sometimes on a survey if it's not ran correctly. So there's that old saying that you can make a survey say whatever you want it to say kind of thing. So the more, like I said, drilled down we are, the more accurate we can be with our own people. So thank you.
Right, which is why we reached out to a professional consulting firm that has expertise doing this, as opposed to us going to, say, Survey Monkey in Braxton trying to put this together.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. For the 40, you said there's about 40% of the population that drives into Topeka for work. Where'd that number come from? Who said that?
The 40% number, that was in the last report given by, and I'll have to go back and find it. It's in one of the many things I sit in. That came from a Shawnee County census.
Yeah.
Both the partnership did and the county put together.
Is there any kind of special tax that can be levied against those that are coming from outside of the county to work and taking their money with them for the most part?
State law does prohibit, that would, I think what you're referring to is probably most closely to an earnings tax, basically where you have to pay at the place where you earn it, but state law does preempt cities from doing any kind of earnings tax.
Okay. And I do like the idea, city manager, of you looking over everything in the budget, scrubbing it, even if we would, you know, the best case scenario is that some or all of these, you know, would pass. I think, though, that in some level, and that would be something that the citizens would be able to get. I think something that they would also be able to get is to get rid of, which would be a huge gift, get rid of Topeka Hotel as soon as possible, and I know everybody's trying really hard on that. But the other thing I think that people would be getting is that when we look at how some of these funds, the vision for how we would utilize some of these funds, especially in the way of affordable housing, homeless programs, Built for Zero, et cetera, my belief is that what the citizens also would be getting was a higher sense of safety, because these are huge public health and safety issues, and we have not been able to adequately address them yet. So by having these extra funds in the coffers, you know, and definitely understanding, no, this isn't going to go for any pay hikes. I mean, everybody should be suffering in this, you know, and not even assume that they would get more money. That's just down and out greedy. But there are some other tangible things that I think we need to have as part of that selling point, in addition to what Councilman Duncan is saying. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Hiller, in this meeting?
Thank you. Yes, and apologies for that interruption. I'm not seasoned at, I knew I had to set up a Zoom meeting and they were starting at 6, so I didn't know how to hand it off. Thanks for your patience. Couple of thoughts. One, Josh, your processing of all the numbers, you did a really great job. I really appreciate the handouts that we have. I was troubled at first because the options did not include what we've now heard a couple of times, and that being doing, if you want to call it an internal audit, or actually looking program by program, which we talked about at the last budget meeting, and there was some strong consensus among the council that we wanted to see that happen. And it wasn't listed as one of the options on here as to how we were going to address. So you mentioned scrubbing in response to some folks. So is that actual looking at, okay, each program and each subdivision of that, why are we doing this? Are we accomplishing goal? Is this necessary for a city? Is that how we're looking at these things, or?
Yeah, so Councilmember, again, and I understand this is probably the first time that we've put out, you know, some of those options, right? Like looking at the CIP, looking at things like that that may reduce the impact on operating programs. And so what I'm really hoping to glean from this discussion is, and I don't expect the answers tonight, but over the next few weeks, I've asked Josh to reach out to set up meetings with you individually so that we can understand, hey, we know we have $1.5 million, 1.478 in our social grants, and we're talking about eliminating that by half or reducing that by half. Is that something that's going to be palatable to council? I don't know. The dreams, I think we mentioned reducing the dreams by half to take it out of the bonding and do the half-cent sales tax. I don't know if that's going to be palatable to members of the council. I don't know. So I need to have those discussions with each of you individually. I want to hear your thoughts on what we are doing more of, what we're doing less of, what we need to do more. Because I think that if I ask 10 different people in this room, I'm going to have 10 different answers. And so I really want to have those discussions with you. But again, this is an example of what some of the things that we have looked at, some of the things that we can do to address the deficit. But again, is there an appetite to reduce the dreams or to reduce our social service grants? I don't know. Because in the example we gave, we took a $17 million deficit that we said, hey, first cut is 13% across all operating departments. I heard tonight that, there might be, some departments may need to cut more because maybe there's some services that folks around this dais may not, think that we need to be doing. And so those are some of the conversations I hope to have over the next couple of weeks with each of you. So again, just depending on what we want to do. So instead of doing a $17 million cut just to personnel, you saw this example where we had a $9 million cut. So.
And thank you for that. In terms of where I'm at, I don't want to just be talking about anything other than the operating budget, which is the biggest piece of that. And so we talked about it even back when we did the 2025 budget. Something like, for instance, if we can hire our team of engineers in-house, we can save $2 million. And we need to get that done right away so that when we are issuing new work, when we're doing new jobs, we're using our own people instead of hiring it out. And so that's same product, efficiency and how to get it done, not just cutting staff or cutting programs, but looking at how we do it. And that's part of just the core internal audit of, are we accomplishing what we need, just as an example. And so I hope that we're not being afraid. You mentioned looking at some management positions, which we talked about before as well. I guess they weren't on the list of things we were looking at, yet those are some big places where we can be more efficient and economical, perhaps anyway. So just wanted to make sure that was being included in the oversight as we look at this.
And we are, Councilmember, but again, so that we don't just do a straight $17 million reduction in staff. I need to know if there's, support from the council as to maybe some of these capital projects. Maybe we delay, or maybe we don't do as much of, because then that would ultimately reduce what we have to cut from operating.
In terms of some other comments on that, cutting the CIP is what got us to where we are today, needing to do our facilities, still needing to do our streets, and so we could look at projects in there. But again, I think looking at that should be included, but saving money by postponing projects is how we ended up with all these buildings needing to be repaired at once, all the potholes, all the neglected streets. So want to make sure that we stay on track with what our priorities are as we move forward. Personally, I do think I want to make sure that we are considering whether trying to go after a sales tax, a new sales tax, will give us any conflict on renewing our street tax only a year later. Because sort of in making an assumption that we would want to do that, but I think it expires in, 28?
I think it's 33, but.
No. I think it expires October 1st, 2029. Let me fact check that.
It's a 10-year tax only, the city one.
Yeah, the city one, yep.
And it's coming up, and so I think we need to always be thinking, 5 years out, if we do this year, what is that gonna mean for other things that we're doing, looking not only at the numbers in the budget, but realizing that we have sales tax to renew. The county one may go till 33, but this one's shorter. Ours is shorter. So be keeping in mind whether we're wanting to renew that and whether we can defend. Again, with the thoughts about the operating budget and looking at why are we doing this? Is it efficient? Is it best? To defend to the citizens that we would make changes in the CIP or that we would ask them for new money without having thoroughly, like fine-tooth comb, gone through what we're spending now. To me, if we do that and we've identified things, then we can explain that to the citizens. But if we haven't, and it seems like we just are trying to add money without doing the due diligence, I think we'll have some pushback. I think 100% of us along the way had said we didn't think citizens would want to do another sales tax, and so really prioritizing looking inward. I'm okay with considering all, but I think we have to look inward. Again, I had a list of specifics that I brought up at budget time. I still have them point by point. I don't want to talk about it on TV, but I think all of us with these conversations with you and working on it can help. Also, in terms of the survey, this is just me maybe, but I hope that it would be promoted as a survey from you, city manager, asking people this, because the proposal to do a sales tax really hasn't come from us, but it has come from you. So I don't know how other people feel about that. Particularly since that proposal comes with the package that we saw today. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Miller and Councilman Gale.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to say anything, but on that vein, we hired the man. It's us together.
And I was gonna, you said the exact word, we're a package, we're a package deal. And as Councilman Miller said, we hired him, and we're all in this together kind of thing. And I think we should all stand behind whatever plan we come up with.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
Councilman Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. Just two quick things. I know, it doesn't matter. I would like to see who's doing, not tonight, but send us who's doing that polling. I mean, I've done a lot of those polls, 25 questions. It's too many, man. I'm just going to put that out there. I mean, it just is. I've done a lot of these in my political world. Hopefully they'll finish the survey, because I'm afraid you may have a lot of people drop out if it's that many. Just my 2 cents on that one. My approach to the sales tax, and I've said this to both the mayor and the city manager previously, and seeing the letter from the Commissioner of Elections as it outlines deadlines, and this year's a little different because there's elections. Next year, there's some too, but we basically couldn't do anything before June. We got the 90-day period before we could start collecting. This problem is very real. It's not conceptual. But we're in it. We're here dealing with it both as staff and as elected representatives. We haven't been able to show the public anything tangible. So the conversation is still to some degree conceptual. We haven't sat down and crafted a budget that shows this is what is going to look like if we have to make these tough choices versus here's the budget that it would look like if we had some collection of this sales tax. And without that piece, I think it's very hard for the public to connect those dots because there's just nothing to show them. These are the services lost, these are the cuts made, this is the reality of what we have to pass. And I think that is the biggest hill we have to climb in getting support if you want to continue to go down this path. I personally believe we could go through this year's budget process. We could present what essentially those two budgets would look like. This is the budget we're going to pass because we have to. We don't have this sales tax. But if you want to course correct, then when we get into November, we can take a vote on putting something on a mail-in for next February, which then allows us to start collecting it if it passes, and we think that's the path by July 1st, which gives us half a year of collections, which does help us pay for that first half of the year and figure it out from there. I know that's scary because it's not a guarantee. And I understand the heartburn and that creates in looking at that model. But I do share the fear that at this point in time, with a lot of other variables in play, and we'll see what the polling tells us, but I have the same concerns Councilwoman Ortiz has. When I get emails right now from people saying, I can't believe you haven't plowed my street, and by the way, our staff's doing a hell of a job, and I've pushed back on some of that, let me be clear on that, but half those emails conclude with, because I'm paying so much already in taxes, you should get over here, right? That's where people are at, all right, and in a lot of ways, and we have to factor that in and show them what the ramifications really will be very realistic for them, and that's my concern. And why I'd like to at least consider as we walk through this process that. And that's just something I will be thinking about the next few weeks as we have these conversations.
Mayor?
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. You know, I get it. I get where city manager is wanting to go. I get where you're saying, you know, hold back for just a little bit longer. My concern is that what this year is going to bring with any possible, it's not possible, it's going to happen, federal changes that are going to be coming down the pike, that we have no idea what those are, and we have no idea if we are going to have to sacrifice dollars being taken away from us for any particular reason, which is going to add to this whole thing, and then where are we going to go? We don't know how it's going to be impacted, the feds at the state level, and how that state level may impact us. We don't know how it's going to affect, you know, the education system. We don't know how it's going to impact possibly the increase, or maybe it'll be a decrease in poverty. We don't know that. There's so many variables as we get ready to go into the new year and the next 4 years that besides feeling a deep sense of dread, I just believe that we need to be as ready as possible to make sure that we have what we need. And I think to some extent, you know, that has to be translated over to the public. And I like the idea about the budget, but I also think that a lot of people are intimidated by our budget. So I'm always one for dumbing down the budget for people like me. But I am also have talked a lot with folks in Oakland and North Topeka to where it's just too, looking at it even is just too much for them. So if we're going to do something like that, how can we make it more palatable and easier? And that's not being condescending. That's just the way it is, easier for folks to understand these are the two scenarios that we could be looking at. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Carroll and Councilman Miller.
To the Councilwoman Swain, I did speak to the city manager already about the upcoming, because we have the new pseudo cabinet of the Department of Government Efficiencies, to make sure we're watching that, see what's happening, and how that might trickle down to us in the future. So I did mention that our last meeting, I believe, to the city manager, to make sure that we are staying on top of something like that, because I do see where your concerns are there, because I had the same concerns. I think our biggest education we need to do for our citizens is have them understand what's our responsibilities and what we're trying to do versus what everything around us is trying to do. Because we get so many times that county might raise property taxes. We're getting 20 emails about it, and we have nothing to do with that. You know, someone else is doing this, and we can't do anything about it. So that's why I think some of it is the education of what's ours and what we're trying to do, so that way they understand that we've drawn these lines that say that here's what we're responsible for, here's what we're trying to do. Everything outside that bubble may affect us in some way, but as a city, we also need to do what we need to do. And unfortunately, it's Evergy, Kansas Gas, county, state does all their things. Sometimes we have to do our thing also. And we've been very, I think, cognizant over the last couple of years on some of those things, the utility rates and other things we've done to make sure we're not, I believe we're taking a very small bite of the apple compared to what we could have compared to areas around us. And so I think we need to let the citizens know that and understand that we are doing our best on that aspect, but we need to let them see that when it comes to county property tax, that's nothing to do with us. But like I said, everyone in this up here will sit there and say, when the county does that, we get the emails about it. So, thank you.
Councilman Miller.
Thank you very much. I I think to me, when we went through and did the 13%, obviously that was just a big overview. But if we can break that down in a week and a half before we make a decision, great. But I don't think that that's necessarily possible. You, and I say you, Councilman Duncan, asked about something tangible, and I like that idea. Is it possible for us to literally break it down to what a tangible dollar approximately would be per household or per person if they were an actual tax implemented? Now, obviously, it can't be 25 questions. I think SurveyMonkey gives you 10 on its free version. But
Survey says,
right? But if I were to be presented with a thought, okay, hey, your household, you guys are going to pay $50 more, but this is what's going to happen from that. Is that something that we can do? Because if I was asked if I'm paying $50 more, I'm paying it right away to do the services that we're trying to do for the citizens.
We can dig in.
I get it, but
We can dig in on trying to quantify that. It's kind of hard to quantify because just people's family is different. So we'll,
but I mean, like if we had a range of 1 to 25,000 a year, 25 to 75, stuff like that. You know what I mean?
So we can try to come up with something and send it out to the council.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Banks.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I sit here and I look at our proposed tax sales initiative, certainly public safety is dear to my heart. Infrastructure is something that I think is really, really important to anything that we do in this city when we start talking about reduction. But when I talk to people, all those people are asking me, how many people are actually sitting at our table that made the decision to put us where we are right now? How many people are in this room that had something to do with those decisions that put us here? I think that obstacle is one of the things that we're going to have to overcome before we can be effective in any of our initiative. Certainly, I would never want to see hiring freeze, because that affects not just the people that work for the city, but those families also of those employees. So when we're talking to the public, I think we need to really consider what they are thinking about us. If we were a governing body that collected taxes like we should, we would probably not have the deficit that we have right now. And I think if we fail to look at that, then we're not doing our jobs. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mm-hmm. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple points. One, Councilman Banks, I think it's cumulative, sir, as far as, how we've gotten to this point, right? It wasn't just not collecting, certain taxes.
Understand that.
Well, there were some creative forecasting of some budgets, some of our revenues, that, definitely we've had to pay our employees what they're worth. I think that a lot of not just the union increases, but the non-union increases, to be competitive, to keep our staff, to attract staff. It's just, those are things that we've had to do. And so it's not, it hasn't been any one thing that has contributed to this. This is cumulative. And so I will be completely forthcoming when I tell you that there's been, looking back at, I love the fact that the question was asked, because it's like, hey, how did we get here? And so I think Josh, again, did a great job kind of explaining, how. So it hasn't been any one person, any one thing. So, but to Councilman Duncan's point, we're here now, and we have to deal with it. I do want to address that, speaking to the point of our staff and keeping our operations going, we do have to submit a balanced budget to the state by September 30th, right? So if we go forward without knowing whether or not we're going to do a sales tax, we have to submit something that shows all the cuts. Now we can come back and maybe we can budget 6 months salary or or something like that. But I mean, we won't know if we wait. Like we won't know which budget we need to submit. And so that, again, I think I share with the governing body, even during the 2025 budget process, that we need to have these discussions early. And that's why we're doing this now. Now, I did also mention that over the next few weeks, I've asked Josh to set up meetings with each of you so that way we can get the tangible program. Essentially, what we're trying to do now is try to put together a proposed budget with and without sales tax. And so that is why I need to hear from you. What are those things that are important to each of you? So that way, and again, as part of the normal crafting of a proposed budget, I mean, that needs to happen. This year, I didn't really have I didn't have a whole lot of time to do that for the 2025. But again, I need to know what the priorities are from each of you. So that way I can put together something. I mean, it won't be final, but close. So that way we can answer the questions, hey, if we do not do X, then the results will be Y. And that's, based upon input as far as what is a priority to this body and to the public. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I agree with it. There was a little discussion about maybe putting stuff off, but I think the short deadline and not kicking that can, and all of us making the time to meet with you and coming up with just two budgets and something solid that we can all share. And personally, of course, we may say, I supported this and I know that, but this is how it is. I think you're on the right track. I think we need to do it by February 4th, or I guess the 11th at the latest, and get on with it. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Is Neil still on Zoom?
I don't think he was on Zoom.
He
Was he?
was.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know if he had
He is.
anything to add.
Yeah, I didn't know you were going to be here with us, Neil. Feeling the way you were. Do you have any comments, sir?
Sorry I couldn't be there in person. We're talking about a lot of the same items that we talked about 3 or 4 weeks ago at the retreat. I appreciate the information that Josh has provided. Josh and the rest of the staff there. I think it starts to get the question posed in a manner that we need it to be. I'm not ready to say let's go forward with a sales tax ballot as quickly as possible. I tend to concur with Councilman Duncan that we can probably look at it next year and still have a significant impact if that goes forward. I also think that we have to, we can't just rely on the passage of a half-cent sales tax to solve the issue that we're in now. So a combination of a lot of things. These kind of issues aren't easy, and there's never a silver bullet. As somebody said once, it's silver BBs. It's a lot of things that contribute to the answer. So those are my thoughts. Appreciate you calling on me. Thanks, Councilwoman Ortiz. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome. Okay. If there are no other comments, I'd like to have an opportunity to have listened to everybody. Sorry, I didn't see.
I apologize. I interrupt. I just want to make clear, as we are a governing body and we have our own opinions on things and how we do this job. I want to make it clear off of something Councilman Banks just said. For myself, I will never give a thought or a vote to anything with the thought of wanting to be reelected or liked. I just want to be clear on that. I mean, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to do the right thing. We're here to do what's best for the citizens, no matter if it allows us to get reelected or not. And if we're not going with that thought, then I'm not really sure what we're doing here, being honest. So let's just make sure that we keep that in thought. And that's just me personally. Now, obviously anybody can do what they want to do, but if we're doing the right things, we should get reelected if we want to be reelected. So, thank you, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Was that brought up about election or reelection or?
No.
You said something.
He
I'm
talked
sorry
about
if he did.
How did we get here, or who we're sitting in?
Oh, yeah, how many years back, so
Yeah.
kicking the can down the road and all of that. Yeah, I don't think any of us kind of need that lecture that people can decide, so.
I'll get a chance eventually. Go ahead, Councilwoman Ortiz.
I'll be short.
That's all right.
If you sit in your chair long enough, you will know every vote hurts somebody and every vote helps somebody. So when those questions arise, like, how did we get here? Just like you guys said, we've got his back. Karen asked that he come forward with it. And you said we all voted for him. You're right, we did. And he's here and we are a team. And we will have the ultimate vote at the end of the day. So I agree. Sometimes I think those discussions are, are the cart before the horse. But you have to remember, he can't put that out. That's why we're having this conversation about the sales tax. And we'll have a final vote on that sales tax, whether we want it or not. So we are still on the same team. I think she just asked a question that, why can't he come out with it? Because we didn't all come up with it. And if you sit there long enough and you be patient long enough and you live long enough in that seat, you'll see every vote that we do, it hurts somebody and every vote helps somebody at the end of the day. But I don't think any of us were saying, we don't have his back. We're all in this together. We know that. But at the same time, this is what he's brought forward. And so I just want to say that. But we'll have the ultimate vote, and then it'll be out of his hands. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Good. Anything else?
Mr. Mayor,
I've been on the on-deck circle for a while.
hit a home run, Mr. Mayor. Go on. Play ball.
I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak, and we've had good discussions. There are a number of things that have come up this evening, so I really appreciate the openness about these conversations. The city manager is taking, in my opinion, a very measured approach to how he is scrubbing our personnel needs, our service needs, our possible overstaffing. He's taken a very measured approach. The one thing that I think that I really liked that was brought out by Duncan, and I hate to give him credit all this time, but is that, and I agree with it because I remember being at the police department when before other governing bodies said, you're going to have to make an across-the-board cut. And even internally, we would look and say, well, I don't think it's effective for what we're trying to do. There are some areas in the department that maybe we could have cut what was suggested. There were other areas that you just didn't need to touch and leave it alone or to boost it. So the option to be able to look at appropriate cuts, it's more work for you because it's not just across the board. But I think it really shows the intent by you and the governing body to make these decisions based on a lot of facts and not sweeping arguments or efforts to solve a problem quickly, because I don't know that that ever gets us the right solution. So there are some good things that came up in here this evening, and I really appreciate the time that the governing body is taking to meet with the city manager, to be honest, because some of you are very more intimately involved with some of these social services and grants that we do, and others are not. So for some of us, it might be, okay, it's time to cut some of these, and others might say, no, that's my favorite one. So you have to go through that whole list and be honest and be practical about what you're going to propose, because much like the deputy mayor said, we don't know what's going to happen at the federal level. But I have said this before, and especially during the pandemic. A lot of cities look to the federal government to help them out. And they were sorely disappointed. The city of Topeka kept its head up and kept working, and we came out of it in a lot better shape than other cities. That's why we were noted to be number 1 in the state and number 5 in the country. We're not comparing ourselves to Wichita and others. We're taking care of business here at home. And the people who are sitting in these seats were elected by people who have trust in them. That doesn't mean that that trust, that they agree with everything that we do, but you still have to have that overall long-lasting trust that we are doing the best we can for the majority of this community to be as positively impactful as we can be. And preparing is part of that. And in my opinion, at this point, I'm leaning in the direction of doing everything we can to support the city manager as he goes through the steps to get us in a position that we have that option to present a detailed plan to the public. Some will still say that it's not enough. Others will say it's too much. It's up to this governing body who is elected to make that decision, to make it based on what we feel we can do for the best of this community. So I appreciate all the conversation that has happened this evening, remembering that we each have our pet projects. We each have those things that we could care less about. That's just human nature. But that's not our sole position. It's not about us. It's about this city. And so I appreciate everything that everyone has brought up, and we'll do the right thing, depending upon whether or not somebody points the finger at an individual or all of us. We'll do the right thing, because that's what we're here for. So unless there's anything else, I appreciate everything that you've offered tonight, Josh. It gives us a good place to get started. I appreciate all the comments from the governing body. If there's no further business comes before this body, this meeting is adjourned.